You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Protein Machining, and this week I'm joined by Ben Kaplan of BNE Dynamics. Welcome, Ben.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for taking the time. I know we've been talking on Instagram for, I don't know, a long time now, and it's really nice to kind of put a face and a real name to the name on Instagram. So thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be a guest here.
So for those who don't follow you on Instagram or whatever, what does B&E Dynamics do? Where can they find you? What are you all about?
Sure. So BNE Dynamics is a company I founded in 2006, and we specialize in making performance parts for older Volvos, mostly all the rear-wheel drive models that were made from the 70s to mid 90s. And we do make some stuff for the newer Volvos, but our bread and butter is really like the Volvo 240, which we have our heaviest product offering for.
The turbo
And we
bricks.
Yeah, turbo bricks, and we do all the design and manufacturing in house, and we have a product line that we sell direct to consumers through our website.
Wonderful. And then what's your Instagram? What's your website? Where can people find you?
Sure. So my Instagram is at Beige Power, which is that my first Volvo, which was a hand me down from my mom, was a 1988 beige station wagon that I tried to be competitive with autocross for a long time, and that I named that car Beige Power. So when I got an Instagram handle back in the day, that was going to be my Instagram handle because I was doing a lot of racing at the time. And the
Oh,
website
okay.
is I have a lot of URLs that link to the same site. There's bneshop.com. There's beigepower.com. My old company name, kaplanky.com, still links forward. So a lot of ways to get to the main site.
So where did Kaplanky come from? Because
Sure.
I'm glad you said it first because I did not want to tackle that one.
Yeah. So in college, I my last name is Kaplan, and in college, the one of the machinists at the machine shop, his last name was Banky, and when we started the company, I brought him in as a partner, and I just made a conglomerate of the names of Kaplanky.
Okay. That makes sense. It looked like somebody else's name. I was like, oh, maybe it's like Henkel or something. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, cool, very
Every
cool.
time I went to like IMTS, all the Nordic people would just like nail it the first time. They're like, "Oh, Kaplanky," and then everyone else doesn't know how to say it.
Yeah,
But it's kind of a made up name, so I don't know why anyone should know how to say it.
like I said, I'm glad you said it first because yeah, I did not want to butcher that one, as I'm sure I would have done.
Yeah,
Well, let's get into how you got into manufacturing and how you got into owning your own company. Then, where does
sure.
this all start?
Well, if we want to, we can go way back to the very beginning when I was in my mother's stomach as a as a prenatal baby. Then she was working. We grew up in Orlando, Florida, and if you might not know that Disney World is a huge employer in the area, and she was a consultant for Disney. She owned her own business, but she had a pretty good consulting gig for the parks. And when she was pregnant with me, she was working with all of the machinists and welders and carpenters who were building Epcot at the time.
Oh wow.
And they were doing like her kind of assignment was to do quality circles, which is like the predecessor to lean. So they were going through and trying to identify all the points of waste that they were experiencing and how they could improve it. So she would meet with all the tradespeople, and they would propose all the things that they think were having problems, and she would collect data. Then they'd present it to like the higher ups who had all the control of the budget, and they'd make changes to try to make things as smooth as possible. So she claims I'm an engineer because I was around all those people when I was in the womb, and that's where it all started.
Okay. And did that continue as a kid? You know, Legos, building stuff, all that.
Yeah, I mean, as a young kid, I loved Brio, loved the trains, and
Okay.
then that kind of changed up to computers. I was born in '83, so when I was like in elementary school, um, I had a 086 in my bedroom, which was like an IBM XT. and I think it
Hmm.
was like 10 megahertz processor. It had, only a floppy drive, maybe like a half megabyte hard drive or something like that. It could
Right.
play like the original Sim City and Frogger and like, all these like super hilarious like old school games that are very like Atari-esque if you want to like look at them.
Right.
Um,
You're like a Raspberry Pi has more computing power nowadays
oh
than
yeah, hundredfold,
yeah.
hundredfold easily. Um, and I still have the computer and it still works amazingly enough. I haven't played with it in a long time, but I haven't had the heart to get rid of it yet.
That's pretty cool. That's really cool. I cannot say that about my childhood computer. I think that thing is long gone in a landfill somewhere.
Yeah. And then so I was playing with computers a lot, and um, I like my mom had her own business doing consulting work, and her main client was Disney. And my grandparents on my mom's side had like their own business, owning like a clothing store up in Western Massachusetts, and that was kind of I just got exposed to people like everyone owning their own business was kind of a normal thing. That's how I like grew up. Um, so at one point when I was up in Massachusetts for like a summer break as a little kid, I started like gathering rocks and I was trying to sell them to people around in the neighborhood. Because growing up in Florida, rocks are very uncommon. And I remember going to a quarry with my dad to like buy a bunch of rocks for landscaping use. So I was like, oh my God, there's rocks everywhere here. Like these things are so valuable. Why can't we like put them together and sell them to people? So it's been a long history of kind of just entrepreneurial efforts.
Okay.
And then got into modding computers, with building my own. Back in the day, I really liked making my own like Doom levels and putting like the custom WAD packs in, and um, changing all the bitmaps for the walls so you could have custom like designs and textures and stuff. And then basically, as soon as I turned 16, I got the hand-me-down 88 beige Volvo 240 station wagon, and like all of a sudden, all my interests more or less just switched to cars. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is fun. Um, and at the time, like neither of my parents were very mechanically adept or like comfortable working on cars, so I had like no real exposure. And I remember not knowing anything. There were no tools around, but started with just like car audio stuff because that was more similar to modding computers. And then I had a friend who was a big time autocrosser in Orlando, and he convinced me to bring my wagon out to an autocross. And and the car was just an absolute, horrible mess because it was on like these, 50,000 mile in Michelin tires, stock suspension with old worn out struts. And it was a lot of fun, and the car was horrible. And I just kept doing it because it was just, it was like crazy that you could just drive as like fast as you want or as hard as you wanted and you wouldn't get in trouble, and it'd be like relatively safe because you're on an autocross closed lot. um so and at that point I started like trying to research, oh, what could I get for my car, what's available. And this was, I think, in 1997, 98. So the internet was around, but a lot of companies didn't have e-commerce websites yet. And there was one company. Basically most companies I think were just kind of like catalog companies at that point, where they'd send out a quarterly catalog. And I remember like waiting to like I'd stay up till 3 a.m. so I could call Sweden and order like shocks and springs, because no one in America like had these types of things available that I could find. And I knew there was this one company in Sweden, and like you call and you hope that they speak English when they answer. And of course they did, because most people in Sweden speak better English than a lot of native English speakers. But that was kind of the intro to buying parts for these old Volvos. At the time, I guess they were only 10 years old, but they're still, when they look the way they do, they become kind of like classic looking very quickly.
Right. Well, and it's
Um,
not like a common car to mod. It's not a
yeah,
Mustang.
it's
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 not a
not a Honda
Camaro.
Civic.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, like I remember looking in like some of the modding magazines like Super Street and stuff, and there would be like all these coilovers and custom like camber plates and stuff for all these Integras and everything. And I was like, none of that stuff existed for my car, or at least I wasn't able to find it because maybe it was in some guy's garage in Norway or something like that, and you had no idea how to find them.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so that kind of, I was wanting to make my car better, and we decided to, I was graduating from high school at that point, and I was interested in kind of the car racing stuff. So my mom's like, well, that's kind of like mechanical engineering. And I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. And I always kind of did really well in my math and science classes. So I was really drawn to that. And then I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a business degree as well because of all the like entrepreneurial stuff that I've done when I was growing up. So I only applied to colleges that had both like engineering and business schools. And I ended up getting admitted to George Washington University under their business school. And then in the student orientation program, I switched to mechanical engineering because I was like, this seems like it's going to be a waste of money and time to just go through business school. I want something that's going to be a little more challenging and more interesting. So I switched routes and never looked back.
Okay. And then when were you first exposed to machining and manufacturing?
Well, there was like a very, very basic machine shop at the school. Most GW students didn't know there was an engineering school. Like it was this like small old building, and they'll ask you what your major is. I'm like, oh, an engineer. Like, we have an engineering program. I was like, yeah, you do. It's in the really old building that no one goes in. But they had a super small machine shop when I started. I think it was like 3 prototrack equipped mills, knee mills. Um, Similar lathe, and then a couple like clawsing guys, and a belt, bandsaw, and some belt sanders. And then later on, I think maybe junior year, they actually got like a brand new Amada 4x4 laser cutter,
Oh, cool.
and that thing was sweet because like um, there's just they're laser cutters. They're kind of like 3D printers. Like they're just like the easiest thing to program and run. So like if you can drop a 2D drawing, like you can program it in like 5 minutes and just like knock it out. There's no fixturing. Like it's just you can come up in designs and realize them like extremely fast. And I can kind of became addicted to just like designing everything out of sheet metal that was laser cut and welded together because that was like the fastest, best way at my disposal at the time. And I basically got full reign to play with that laser cutter and run whenever I wanted, um, which is pretty sweet. And I made all types of like, fun, weird projects on the side that had nothing to do with my classes, but nobody really cared. And it was fairly underutilized. I feel like I was one of the only few people actually like using that laser cutter on a weekly basis because most people didn't really understand it or care to play with it much. Um,
Okay. So then how did
so
you go from, screwing around in the school shop to starting a business? I mean,
yeah,
I can see the puzzle pieces, but that's still a pretty big leap to go from one
right.
to the other.
So when I was in school, one of the things that I liked to do was like basically I bought this textbook called Race Car Vehicle Dynamics. It's a really nice textbook that's very technical, and like all of the subjects that you're learning in college, it basically directly applies them to like making a race car better through engineering. And I started like going through the textbook as I was going through my classes, and I was like, oh, this is how I use all these like things that they're telling me, and this makes it a lot more applicable and interesting. And so whenever I had a time to do like a class, whenever we got to do a class project where you got to pick your project, I would just make different parts for my car. So like for my manufacturing class, which was a very, very basic intro to manufacturing, I made like a strut brace for my car. Um, and then for my senior design project, I made adjustable control arms for my car.
Oh, cool.
Um, and that was a pretty cool project because like I got to, you had so much time to like really flesh it out and like do like a full like FEA analysis, and then I did like physical destruction of the parts and made sure everything correlated. And and then once you got to break the parts and you'd see like, okay, well, this sheet metal here is a certain thickness and it doesn't get good penetration, so let's change the design and like match it up. And it's like this type of stuff that unless you have a lot of experience or you have the chance to destroy, it's really hard to figure those things out. So it's a quick way to like a steep learning curve, but it really teaches you a lot really quickly. Um, so there was those types of projects going on, and I also did the SAE Mini Baja all throughout college, which if anyone's getting an engineering degree, make sure you go into one of the SAE competitions, because just like having to do all that stuff and actually complete things that work and are like exist in reality, are not just like solving equations and coming up with answers that match, what the textbook examples are, is, I mean, I can't emphasize enough how important that is to become a good engineer, to have those skills to go from the analytical to reality.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah, I was talking to Adam this week when we recorded this week's episode, and I said after we recorded that, like, had I, like, Ethan echoed that same sentiment of like,
yeah,
oh, you're not getting your full money's worth if you're not in a SAE competition. And I was talking to Adam and I was like, yeah, had I been in formula, I might have like stuck it out for the remainder of my degree. And like,
yep,
but on that same token, I wouldn't have found machining. So it's like, well, things work out and things happen for a reason. But yeah, it sounds like, you know, for anybody going into that kind of path, definitely get into some kind of formula or Baja or something like that.
yeah. So at the time, I was posting all those projects I've been working on, and people like, and this was on old school message boards back before, I guess Facebook had just started, but there weren't like Facebook groups, and Instagram wasn't really a thing yet. So I was posting stuff on forums, and people were interested in buying them. So it became a question of, okay, well, let's start making extra of these things and selling them. And there was a couple like little products, like some camber plates and some other stuff, that I was actually moonlighting out of this university machine shop at night, making them and selling them for like beer money on the side when I was a student in school. And when you don't have really any income at all is like huge and amazing.
Right.
So I kind of just got hooked to like, oh man, I can actually make money selling car parts. Like this is pretty cool. And ever since I started doing it while I was in college, I just like, it always became something that I was doing. I never like stopped offering anything. So once I graduated, I kind of looked around for an engineering job in the area because I wanted to stay where I was, and I couldn't find anything that was like interesting. Most of the stuff was like HVAC work or um, weapons contractors. And I just, that stuff didn't really like speak to me. So, and things just started getting busier and busier with my business. So I decided just to go full time. And basically, like, I think it was 8 months after I graduated, I formed the LLC in 2006, and officially launched it. And Carl Banke of Kaplanke, he was, as I said earlier, the welder and machinist at the school, and we worked really well together doing the Baja stuff. So I kind of made a deal with him where I was like, hey, why don't you trade your sweat equity for a share in my company, and like we can build this business and see where it goes. And at the time, like I'd never used a press brake. So I was all about like laser cutting and welding stuff, but like every single part had just like a ton of welding that I would design, because it was just the tool that I had on my hands.
Right.
And as things scaled, Carl quickly became kind of overwhelmed. And I think his wife didn't appreciate that he was spending all of his weekends in the garage welding parts. So our partnership did not last that long, and we split ways, and I ended up just going solo, which um, I think was definitely for the best. So when I started the business, I was just doing like a little bit of stuff at the GW machine shop still, because Carl was involved and I was cool with everyone there. And then my friend wanted to open up a shop in Richmond, Virginia. Um, and that's like 2 hours south of where I'm at. So I was like, okay, and the shop space down there is like super cheap. I think it was like a 16 or 1,500 square foot place for like $600 a month.
Oh, that's great.
Um, so it's
Wow.
like, it's so cheap that like, even if you don't go there and use it, like it's not going to kill you. Like, it's
Right.
just like, it's nice to have a place to have tools and equipment that I can go to when I need it. And like, if I don't go there, like I don't have to feel bad about it, because it doesn't cost that much to like have that space. Um, so, and then my Carl was living in Southern Maryland, which was like 2 hours south from my house. And then I had basically, when I graduated from school, my parents just happened to move up from Florida to the area that I lived in. So it was an easy option to move back in with them while I launched my business, which made it like a really low stress way to like grow. And if I didn't make any sales or money, it didn't matter because like I didn't have to pay rent or anything like that beyond like the $600 a month at my commercial real estate warehouse. So, we went through, I did that whole dance for, I don't know, it seemed like a year or two where I was, driving from Richmond north to DC, Southern Maryland. And it was just like hell because you're spending so much time in the car. And like, if you wanted to do something, you might have to go to all three locations. And things kind of fell apart with the whole Richmond crew. And so then I grabbed all my stuff and I found a warehouse space up in Rockville. And I think in 2008, that's a 2,400 square foot warehouse. And I've been there ever since. Um, and and then so I guess as far as equipment goes, when I first started the business, I had an idea that I was going to build a bunch of roll cages because I was building all these tube frames for Baja. And I was like, oh, this is like fun, rewarding work. I like to do this. And like, I go to like track days at Summit Point or VIR, and I'd look around and like, I just see so many like abysmal cages that were just like, you could like stick your entire head between like the main hoop and like the B pillar of the car because they're just like, they pass the tech specs, right? They're like legal to race, but like it's kind of like putting a triple XL suit on someone who's wearing like a medium. It's like, yeah, you're still wearing a suit, but like it doesn't fit anywhere like what it's supposed to fit like.
Right. Yeah.
And I was pretty detail oriented, so I was like, okay, well, I can make like really nice cages, and I know there are clients out there that want these cages. So I did a couple like demo cages for people, and I quickly realized that the bulk of the people have cages like that because they're only willing to spend a certain amount of money on a cage.
Right.
And like, it's like, if you want a full roll cage for $1,000, like there's not enough time to like make sure everything fits like and is like wedged against every single surface in the car. And I was just kind of like, I don't really want to make commodity roll cages. And I knew the only way I could get the business of people willing to spend, $3,000 to $15,000 on roll cages is by building like a brand name. And it just didn't seem like that was a very quick process. So I kind of like shifted away from that really quickly because there was like two shops that were backed out for 2 years doing Porsche roll cages and stuff like that for, 10 grand each, but I didn't have the name for that. So it was a fight not worth fighting, I think.
Right.
But I started with like, I got a Bailey rotary draw tube bender. I got one of their eccentric tube notchers, which is really cool. So it uses a 1-inch roughing end mill, and then you can set an eccentric track and you rotate the handle and it'll notch anywhere from like a 1-inch to a 3-inch circle.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
you can use like an end mill and like quickly set up this like, this purpose-built piece of equipment and like notch any size that you want of tubing with just one tool instead of having to buy like different size hole saws, or if you got a belt sander style, different size drums. And it's really cool. And one of the big advantages of one of those pieces of equipment is if you're like coping tubes to maybe hit on a compounder in the middle of a bend, you might not want something that's directly on size. You might want something that's bigger or smaller. So like you can cope like a 1.42 inch circle to match with a 1.5 inch tube, and you can get a better fit up than if it's just like 1.5 going to 1.5. So
That's really cool.
That tool is really cool. It doesn't get utilized enough for how much I paid for it, but it the plans change and I still have it. Got a pneumatic actuated cold saw, which is really nice. And that thing is like a boss for cutting tubing. Any thin wall stuff, it just no burrs, super like pneumatic clamping on both sides makes it no drama, really fast and easy, great for doing prototyping, roll cages, even some production work. And I got a manual lathe, like a 1440 Taiwanese microcut lathe, which was pretty. We bought that used. I think I paid like $3,000 for it. And out of all that initial equipment that I bought, new and used, the lathe is what we use the most, and it's like the thing that I spent the least amount of money on.
That's how it goes, right?
We still use that lathe every day to make bushings and to like prep coilovers and stuff. And it's like, man, if I realized I was going to be, using this one lathe so much more than everything else, I probably would have spent more money on the lathe and less money on other stuff. But you never know how things are going to turn out in the future.
Right.
Um, so I had accumulated all that stuff in Richmond, and then that made the move up with me to Rockville. And once I kind of lost Carl as a partner, I had some people that I knew that did welding for me, but it wasn't quite I didn't quite have the same access that I used to have where, it was someone that was just like ready to go all the time. So I started kind of shifting away from all the laser cut designs, and I started doing machine from solid designs like billet machined parts and stuff. And I had a friend who made Honda parts, and his business was like he didn't manufacture anything; everything was just all out of China. So he gave me their contact name, and I started having parts made by them. Initially, the parts were really good, and the prices were like amazing. And then as my parts became more complicated, and I became pickier about things, like it became quickly realizing that like there was no this was not worth the cheap price to like use this vendor. So I was like, well, I need to I need to be able to figure out how to make these things myself. Um, because at the end of the day, like a lot of the car parts that you sell have to be low margin, otherwise people won't buy them because that's just kind of the game of car parts is people you have a price in your head that you're willing to pay for a specific item, and whether it costs you 3 times to make that or 1/10 to make that, like there's only so much people are going to pay for a certain item.
Right.
And so on these low margin parts, I was paying a bulk of what I was making out to the machine shop to make them for me. I was like, I should just pay myself to make these parts to help make this business grow, and then I can reinvest and kind of grow things more quickly. So my friend Anthony, who works at a shop called Custom Performance Engineering, they were in Beltsville, Maryland at the time. They were similar age people of me. I think they all went to University of Maryland, and they had their own CNC mill and CNC lathe, and I like kind of toured their facility, and I was like, whoa, like these machines are like really cool. Like I need to like learn out about them. And he was telling me all about, how all these like, old Japanese iron machines are like they're great. Like they're so reliable, so robust, and they're really cheap. And I was like, oh, okay, this is like good to know. And I saw this Mori Jr. I saw it making parts. And I was like, okay, this doesn't look like it's anything too fancy, and I could probably, figure out a way to like swing it financially to get one of these in house. So I started the hunt, just looking at online auction sites, and I found a place out of Ohio that was closing, and they had a 1990 MV40B Morisiki vertical. And it has, let's see, I wrote down the travels and all that. I think it's a Cat 40 machine. It has like a 7.5 kilowatt spindle, and it's like a 31.5 inch by 16 inch by 20 inch VMC. So
Okay.
pretty wide travel, kind of narrow in the Y axis, and a lot of Z travel. And when I got it, I think in 2011, it was 21 years old at that point. And I was like, all right, cool. This is like the same technology that was in my XT bedroom computer. I know how to work with this kind of stuff.
So
I've
is
seen
that a
these.
FANUC control as well?
Yeah, it was a FANUC
Okay.
one. I was specifically looking for a FANUC one because my friend Anthony was like, just make sure it has FANUC because FANUC still supports everything. And the other thing you don't want to get is the yellow cap FANUC. Make sure it's a red cap FANUC.
Yep. You want that rigid
Um,
tapping.
yeah. So I found a red. I realized that this generation of Mori came with is a FANUC 10 machine, and it had rigid tapping, 8K spindle, and all that good stuff. 20 tool changer. I ordered it, and like I took like every penny that I had plus some more that I didn't have to get it. And at the time, I was so broke that I was like, I can't afford to pay a rigging company to get this thing off the truck. So I rented like a 15,000 pound forklift, capacity forklift. And at that point, I think probably the heaviest thing that I lifted with a forklift was probably like my 2,000 pound lathe. But we ended up renting a big capacity forklift, and we got it off the truck okay. My friend had some machine skates and in a Kevlar pneumatic like lifting bag, so we were able to like get it off the truck onto the pad and then roll it into position. And I was like, okay, I didn't drop it. We got this thing. I start looking over the machine, and those machines are very interesting because they have a ceramic taper, which is very unusual.
Really?
So if you look inside the taper on the spindle, there's a ceramic liner, for Moris of that age, and it's really cool because it never wears. Like, you're not going to get fretting on ceramic. Like, you're going to have really good surface contact finish, but they can break. Like,
Right.
if you
Chip.
have a crash or something like that, you can chip the ceramic.
Yeah.
And the one that I got had a chipped ceramic spindle liner.
Oh no.
So I was like, oh man, this is I'm already, it's going to cost at least what I paid for this mill to get a new spindle in this thing. So at the time I hopped on like Practical Machinist, and I like listed all the stuff in the Mori forum, and I got someone who was like an old Mori tech to like talk to me. And he's like, I wouldn't worry about it. I've been in shops where people have a lot less of that ceramic taper still intact and they're still running the machines. And I was like, okay, I mean, I'll run it the way it is. And once it's a problem, I'll actually deal with it. Um, but that was like, yeah, it was pretty like heart wrenching at the time.
I
I was like,
bet.
oh my god, I need a new spindle on this VMC that I just bought. But it never had any problems with running a cracked taper. I kind of think of it like using it kind of has been converted to a 30 taper machine
Okay.
based on the amount of ceramic that's missing towards the inside. But
Right.
it's like a 30 taper machine with a large pull stud and more clamping force.
All right. Do you still have that machine?
I do, and we
Okay.
still run production on it.
Wow.
It's a great machine. When we got it, it had like 20K of memory, so that was pretty. You learn how to do a lot of like efficient programming when you're trying to load things into 20K. It
Oh yeah.
also drip fed really, really well, so I was able to drip feed larger programs.
Oh, okay.
Um, and we just had like an old, laptop setup that was dedicated to it next to it, and we would just drip feed in larger programs. But it wasn't so great for like dynamic machining tool paths where you had a lot of short changes in directions because you'd have some like stuttering and stuff. Um, I was doing a lot of research on it, and I found there was a company that offered memory upgrades for the machine. And I was like, well, let's see how much this can fit. And I figured out that I could put up to 192K in it. So I kind of reverse engineered what they were doing for the memory upgrade and just did it myself with buying the chips online.
Oh, cool.
And I found like the right type of memory chips, and I bought them for like $50 or something like that. And it was kind of scary because you have to wipe all the parameters to change basically you have to turn off the control and remove all power before you put these memory chips in. So that wipes the control. So I had
Right.
to like back up all the parameters, which was really scary because like, what if there's a table that I don't know about that I didn't back up?
Uh-huh.
Um, but we ended up getting it back together, and it has 192K now, which is like night and day better. Like most programs that I've been running, I've been able to fit into 192K as long as I'm good with like subroutines and using multiple work coordinate systems and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And
Looping, stuff like that.
yeah, like you have to do a little bit more work to make it work, but it's awesome. Like it'll do surfacing okay. The control has a max speed of 200 inches per minute, and like as long as you're not doing really tight moves, it does fine up to 100, 120 inches per minute. And with the 8K spindle, it's not like you can go that much fast, anyways.
Right. Well, I'm sure
Um,
by this point it's paid for itself over and over again.
oh yeah, for sure. And yeah, so when I got that machine, I had no idea about anything about CNC mills. Like, I finally got power to it after saving enough money to get the wires for it to get it hooked up, which took an inordinate amount of time. And like, I turned the machine on for the first time, and I was trying to hit the spindle like forward button to get the spindle to rotate, and it didn't work. And I was like, what is wrong with this thing? And I didn't realize you had to give it a speed before that button would become active. Because like normally you have to type in like S500 and M3 and then end the
Right.
block insert, and that it'll run. If you use the spindle start button, it'll run at the last RPM that was programmed, but there's nothing programmed. So I literally had like no idea what I was doing when I got that machine. and I just kind of taught myself as I went, and um, made it work, figured it out as I went, type of thing.
So what did you use as resources at that point? Because it's only been very recently, I feel like, in the last maybe 5 6 years where you have like a lot of resources to learn
Yeah.
this stuff. So was it just like all practical machinist and guessing and checking and
Yeah, it was practical machinist. My friend Anthony at CPE, he like came the day I got it, maybe a couple days after I got it up and running. He came over and like he just kind of showed me the ropes of like some basic stuff, and then once I kind of got an idea of like how to get started on things, um, once that it became kind of natural just to like learn and evolve as I went. One of the really good resources that I had at the time is I think I found them on YouTube, but Sandvik has all these like machining videos that they released about like the good machining traits, like the basics of good machining, like chip to thick to thin chip cutting, and like all these different like techniques and things that you should be aware of. So I just watched this like series multiple times, and I was like, okay, these are kind of the fundamentals that I need to understand, and I know how to load code in the machine. I know how to generate code, and then just learning from there was just a trial by fire type of thing.
okay, very cool. And then you've added what another machine since then, or do you have more? Was there something between the Makino and that?
No, so I we're running production on the Mori. In 2018, I ended up initially I got like a whole bunch of I got three different like Kurt vices at auction, and they were all different style vices, but they were Kurt's, and that's what I heard was a good vice name back in the day, and I was able to find them all used, so didn't really break the bank, and I could afford afford them at the time. But that quickly became like a limiter, so we were running production on the machine, and I was like, we can only run 3 parts at a time, this kind of sucks. So I ended up splurging for some orange vice double vices. I got 4 of those, which basically covered the entire travel of the machine. And then we went from going like 3 parts at a time to 8 parts at a time, which was just like life changing. I was like, oh man, this is great. We went from a 15-minute runtime to like a 50-minute runtime, and like it can actually get other stuff done when your machine is running.
Right.
And it doesn't have particularly fast tool changes, so like eliminating tool changes also helped. Like that was a huge monumental upgrade for us. But the one thing that we were stuck with is these Moris, like their chip management is pretty much abysmal and non-existent. Like they don't have chip conveyors, they just have 2 drawers that you pull out towards the front,
Right.
and they kind of have slanted sheet metal so the coolant drains down, but it's not slanted enough so the chips go with it. um, so as we were running production, and you'd run for 9 hours, but you might get 6 hours of machining in because 3 hours of the day you're scooping chips. um, so I was kind of like, next machine I get, it is going to have a pallet changer so I could swap machine parts while it's running, and it needs to have like excellent chip control. Like I don't want to have to think about dealing with chips again. This is so wasteful. We're spending so much time every day just like scooping chips from a bin. Like I've seen this technology called a chip conveyor. Like this should exist in my life. I don't need to like scoop chips for the next like 20 years of my life to save a couple bucks. Like
Right.
so I went to IMTS in 2018, and I kind of had a short list of things I was checking out. I really like the Brother R650
Hmm.
because that had a pallet changer. And even though it's a vertical, I think the Brothers have pretty good chip management with all the wash down and slanted surfaces that they have. So I was looking at that and maybe outfitting it with a couple T200s because I really wanted a fourth axis to do multiple angle machining operations and stuff. And after I got the quote of like 2 T200s, a chip conveyor, and an R650, it was like, I think it was like 200 grand. And I was like, this is a lot of money. I need to
Oh
like,
yeah.
if I'm going to spend this, I kind of approach Brother as being like a very high value proposition, but I think it's everyone speaking of that as like has like S700 or something like that without a lot of extras. And we start going to some of their upper end models, all of a sudden you have like, you're talking big money, which is, I think if you have the type of work that is perfect for Brother, you can't beat it. But I was concerned that I had to, with not all of my stuff fell in that envelope, and I'd really be struggling. So
From what you've posted in the last year or so, it seems like that's a very accurate assumption too.
yeah. So I was kind of like, okay, well, maybe I should look at the Akuma Genos M560V. And then I was like, oh, that doesn't really have a pallet changer. Um, and I'd seen quite a lot of videos online of people machining and like just like the entire bed's just being filled up with chips because it has such a big like vertical bed. And my friend Anthony, he had since transitioned from that Mori Jr. to get buying a whole bunch of Kitamura horizontals. He really loves like the H400s, which is the I think it's like late 90s, early 2000s 400 millimeter kitties with the 16 Fanuc 16M
Hmm.
control. And he keeps buying them. He buys the same machine over and over again, so that way he can like swap parts if he's troubleshooting and stuff, and use the same programs everywhere, which is it's a very smart approach. And
And
so I
those
was
things
like,
are dead reliable. Like
yeah,
that's
like
before, the dumb new controller that people seem to have issues with, and
yeah,
that year of machine, because we had a bunch of 3XIs at my first job, so vertical, I think they're 30 by 20s, but same vintage, same control, and you just can't destroy them. Like they are bulletproof machines.
yeah, and I mean, they run them every day. They're boxway. They're
Yep.
they have really good oiling systems for the spindles, and they're just great machines. So I kind of got the idea in my head that I really needed to get a horizontal because, like, if you think about it, I have all these parts of these pockets, and all the chips get stuck in the pocket. And like, if I had a horizontal, the chips are just going to fall out of this pocket, and it'll be good. So I was kind of like, well, maybe I need to look at horizontals. So I started looking at some of the smaller Kitamuras, like the 300 millimeter pallet things, and I realized that first, most of my parts they would work, but they'd be a little small. So I needed to get a bigger one, and then I was like, okay, well, maybe a 400 millimeter machine would be good. And I started looking around, and I was like, this still looks a little small for my bigger parts. So then I was like, okay, looking at 500 millimeter machines. And as you go up with horizontals, the price also goes up quite a bit.
Yeah,
Um,
they are not cheap.
And so I was like looking at some of the new Kitamura horizontals. I was like, I don't think I can afford this. And I don't know. There's a lot of value to buying a new machine because you have a warranty and you have support and all that. But the value proposition of used machinery to me, as long as you're buying something that was like originally a really high quality machine, it's hard for me to walk away from that way of thinking. And it's pretty much worked for me so far. So I haven't had to deal with the harsh reality of spending a lot of money and getting a dud.
Right.
So I was talking to my friend David McClure, his Instagram CNC Cutting Edge,
Yeah, he was
and
just on MTH last week, I
yeah,
think.
he was making parts for me. And I was talking about machines, and like I was looking at making these big billet aluminum trailing arms, which are like a 26-inch by 4x4 kind of piece. They start out at like 50 pounds, and they go to 7 pounds. And it's just a lot of material removal, really big. And I showed it to him, and I'm like, I want to make these. And he's like, oh yeah, that's no problem. Like I would make those on our Makino. I was like, what's a Makino? And he's like, oh man, like they're great. They're these like super reliable machine, like horizontals. And I started digging into it because I'd never heard of the brand before because I feel like they're not very good at advertising, and they're very like plain Jane type of like machine. They don't have a lot of bells and whistles on them, but they're extremely stout, they're extremely reliable, and they're just super well built. And I think from what I've been exposed to, I think they have some of the best chip management systems that you can get out of the box. Like I don't think you get any better than a Makino from what I've seen. Anything like every single surface inside the machine is all slanted. Um, it doesn't. A lot of horizontals will have a chip conveyor trough that goes through the middle of it. This just has plain sheet metal that has like a jet of water that's flushes through the side of it. So there's never like if you drop something heavy, you can't break a chip conveyor or anything like that. It's just it's really well thought out, and like you can't get them without chip conveyors. They're pretty much standard.
Right.
So that was a
Man, if
huge.
somebody gets a horizontal without a chip conveyor, like I don't know of one that's optioned that way, but like that would be the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Absolutely, yeah. It was like, okay, I don't have to worry about looking for chip conveyors because they all have them. And they're all like the barrel style chip conveyor. So that's really nice. Like it has the extra filtering built in. Um,
Well,
So
so
that was
it
kind of
sounds
like,
like chip management was big. Our first question from the Patreon from Jake Giles was, what features and options were you focused on when looking at an HMC, and what made you choose Makino? So definitely chip
yep,
evacuation and
chip
chip
management.
clearance. What else drew you to Makino? I mean, I know that industry wide, they're kind of known as like some of the most accurate machines out there, like at least geometrically, like without the control involved, some of the
Yeah.
most accurately ground machines too.
Yeah, I mean, it was just I got the recommendation from Dave, and I saw that the chip management was out of this world. So those were two huge check boxes in my book. Um, and this might be a little cringeworthy, but it had a FANUC control, which was something I was like used to.
Right.
But they actually put their own skin on top of FANUC, which makes it really, really nice. My
Is it a big
system,
change? Because it's a their pro series, right? Professional
yeah,
something.
I
Yeah.
have Pro 5, which is the background is like a FANUC 31i A5 control, which is pretty common on like high-end machines from like 2010 to 2014, I think. Um, but their front end system on it makes it really, really nice. Like I on my older Mori, like I've had so many times where I've like had issues with like tool height offsets and tool diameter offsets being called wrong. And like with the FANUC with the Pro 5, like that never happens because they just have really good tool management tables. It's pretty much impossible to program it with an incorrect like tool height offset or something like that, which is really nice because it just ups your level of confidence with the machine, and that way you can get through prototypes faster and into production faster.
Definitely.
Um,
Hey, so what year is your machine?
mine's one of the first NXs that they released. So it's a 2010 technically, I think.
Okay.
It's
And
serial number
what
10.
makes it an NX versus like I don't really know much about Makino nomenclature, so what
Yeah.
makes it an NX specifically?
So it's an A61, and the A was the series of the machine. The six, like a A51's a 400 millimeter, 61's a 500 millimeter for some reason. I
Of
don't know why
course.
it's not like an A41 for 400 millimeter, but that's just the way it is.
Right.
Um, and with the introduction of the NXs, one of the big things that I saw that was different is the fourth axis is direct drive versus having a worm and gear planetary set inside the fourth axis
Okay.
underneath the tombstone. So I was all about that because I feel like, that could be a problem with the horizontal that has a lot of hours on it, is having need like the gear set for the fourth axis to get rebuilt. And that was, if you can just eliminate that whole part and just have a servo motor directly on it, I feel like it's going to be faster. It's going to be more reliable, less parts to go bad. Um,
Right. And so
so
it's a
that
true
was,
fourth, not a indexer either, because I know a lot
yeah,
of
yeah,
horizontals are like 1 degree indexing only.
yeah. The earlier generation, the A61s, you could get them with just a 1 degree indexing, but I think every NX comes with a full fourth,
Okay.
because it's just a servo.
Right.
I don't think they ever handicapped them to like save money and sell people on a, unlocking your potential type of thing.
Yeah, who would do something like that? Um, well, cool. Let's. What else do you like? I know Easton had messaged me before we started, and it was like, "Man, pick his brain on the Makino. Like that's one of his dream machines as well." So, like, what other things do you really like about it? Is there anything that you don't like about it that you were surprised about after getting it?
um, there's some things that I don't like about it, but I think that just kind of comes with the territory of horizontals in general. One of the things that you have to be wary of is the spindle head can hit the base of the tombstone if you're machining down at the bottom.
Ooh,
So like if you have like a Y of 6 inches or below, it's like 0 to 6 inches of your Y axis, which is the vertical axis on a horizontal, you have to be really careful because the tombstone, like the ledge of the tombstone, can intersect the housing of the spindle. So like machine simulation is really important for that kind of stuff, so you can check and make sure you're not going to like crash something. And I ended up get 2 6-sided tombstones for the machine, which one thing I didn't realize at the time was that each face has a different amount of clearance at the base because you have like a hexagon on a square. So
right,
like B0 and B180, like you can run really short gauge length tools, but B60, B300, like you can't run tools you have to run longer tools to machine towards the bottom of the tombstone. Otherwise you can have interference issues.
Mm,
So that's one thing that I don't like, but um, that's not anything. I mean, maybe some machines don't have that problem because they design them differently, but I think that's just kind of inherent with horizontals
right.
and with the type of tombstone that I picked. Um, but everything else, I mean, the only other issue that I've had is I have seen on toolpaths that are not like on setups that are kind of a little iffy. I can get them to run fine at the base of the tombstone, and at the top of the tombstone, they could vibrate and cause
Right.
chatter, which I was very surprised to see it the first time when I was running a really heavy chamfering toolpath, and like the bottom ones were fine and the top was fine. It was all like chattery. I was like, it's the same toolpath, it's the same cutter. Like, what's going on? Like, are these like parts really? Is it like really right on that verge of chatter that like the distance between the top of the tombstone and the bottom of the tombstone makes a difference? And the answer was yes.
Are they full cast iron tombstones?
Yeah, they're full cast iron. They're I had Eric at Orange Vice he machined them for me. They're like Tombstone City tombstones that he sourced,
Hmm.
and I just have 3 ball locks per side. So each tombstone has like 18 ball locks on it,
That's killer.
which is it's been pretty nice. And I got a bunch of their I think I got like 18 of their Delta Vices, which are really nice for Op 1 stuff. I don't really love it for Op 2 as much. The soft jaws they sell are kind of expensive, especially after you get used to the Carve Smart stuff that works with the Orange Vice doubles. Like those Carve Smart jaws those things are the best.
Yeah.
Like I just love those things. They're so inexpensive and so modular, and you can just buy like the 72-inch blank and just cut it to the length that you need versus and it's just extruded stock, so it's inherently going to be cheap.
Right.
The Orange Vice soft jaws have like all these serrated teeth in them. There's just a lot of machining features, so it makes it more expensive. And I don't know if I would care so much if it was just, I was doing prototyping work and I needed a set of soft jaws, but if I'm tooling up for production, I need to like think about, do I want to spend $1,000 on soft jaws so I can make like 18 parts of these things at a time? Like that becomes a real head scratcher. Is how do you figure out where the break even is on how many parts you put in the machine at a time and how much you spend on your fixturing?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
that's been the biggest challenge for me to adapt to horizontal, is figuring out those economics, because you want the machine to run as long as possible so you can set it up and leave and go home and have the machine run for 4 hours. But is it really worth spending that much money on maybe a 200 part run to say, to have that flexibility? And I haven't come up with a situation that it's been worth it to like tool up fully, because all my production runs are anywhere from like 100 to 300 parts, and the machine runs so fast they're done before you started.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there's that point where you're like, well, if I like rev up this part and change it slightly, then there's
Yeah.
another $1,000 in fixturing, and like
Yep.
I got to scrap all this soft jaws. Yeah, it's a tough game for sure.
So yeah, I always that's always a conversation at the dinner table between me and my girlfriend, is how many fixtures am I making for op two? She loves those conversations. She's really into it.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Sometimes I think she's just humoring me.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Another question we had from Way of the Mill, John, was asking, I think we're all familiar with the JDM performance market, but how big is the Volvo performance market? And I actually echo that question because, when I found out that that's all you did, I was like, oh man, I didn't realize there were that many Volvo people out there. Like, it's cool.
Yeah, my assessment is the market is very small in comparison. It's been big enough for me to grow a small company with it. When I started doing stuff, I don't really think there was a market, but like most of the people that I was talking to online were all about like DIY stuff. Like, what's the best way you can make your car fast with going to the junkyard and spending the least amount of money? Was the culture. So trying to make parts to sell to that crowd is very difficult, because, a lot of people are either machinists or welders and they're very hands-on. So like the value proposition you give them to actually like get their money for something has to be really, really strong. And that's, back in the day when I started, like these Volvos were just commodity. Like you could get a nice one for $1,000 that ran. Like people were just junking them left and right because there were so many of them and they were getting kind of old. And Um, and yeah, it's just people don't want to spend $1,000 in suspension when they buy their car for $500 and they don't
Right.
really value the car. But ever since kind of launching the business, the community has been changing a lot as the cars become more scarce and older. Different people are buying the cars, and some of the people that were young without income now are older with income, and like they'll start like buying parts that they didn't buy 5 years ago or 10 years ago because at the time they were in high school or something like that and didn't have like the means. So it's
Have
a
you noticed in the very recent years a big uptick in sales? Because I know,
yeah,
like, I have my MR2,
yep,
and when I started looking, even like 3 or 4 years ago, or actually, I think it was 6 years ago when I got my first MR2. Back then, I could pick up an MR2 for like $800,
yep,
and now you like find a shitbox MR2, and they're like, $3,500. I
yep.
know what I have. Don't lowball me. Like blah blah blah. And it's like, dude, what? So have you noticed a similar thing in the Volvo community now that like there's all these people who, like you said, have disposable income and remember, their glory days in high school with a 240 or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's there's a totally new clientele as of the last like couple years. Basically, as soon as the pandemic started, I think my company grew like as far as revenue goes, we grew like by 40% last
Whew,
year, or
that's
I guess
giant.
2 years ago. Yeah, which was huge because before that we were like maybe 10 to 15% per year, maybe less than that. But it was always a constant like increase in revenue. But we got a lot of stimulus check orders once the pandemic started, and and yeah, it's just different people buying the cars. There are people now that are buying a nice one for $10,000, so they're not afraid of spending $4,000 on suspension or something like that. Like they're like, okay, my budget for this project is 30 grand or whatever, and like this is this little quarter, and like that never used to exist. But as the market changes and the car value changes, then kind of the things that people are willing to order also changes. So it's always developing. It's growing, but it's definitely a fraction of what like any like JDM car is. Like I don't know. I'd like to think that like maybe there's probably people making BRZ parts or something like that that probably sell my annual volume in like a month or something like that.
Yeah, I could see that. But yeah, those are much more commodity items. And I know there are far fewer companies making those parts in the US for sure.
Yeah.
Like a lot of that, Civic, Honda, BRZ, that is like ripe for Chinese production, low cost. It's the same people who are like, oh, I want to build an intake for my car out of Home Depot PVC pipe or something.
Yeah, for
Like I've
sure.
seen all of that stuff, and you're like, it makes you cringe. Not that there aren't high spec BRZ parts, because I know there are. I've seen them out there, but yeah, I think it'd be hard to compare yourself to any kind of commodity platform like that. The other question we had from Fink Builds was, what were the struggles and processes you used the first time you made the 240 speaker grills, and what did you do differently to make them so much easier this time?
So initially, we made them on the Mori back in the day, and there's countersunk screw holes on both sides of the part. So off the bat, it was a 4-aught part because you had to refixture for doing the side machining screw holes. So that was a lot of work to build fixtures and to position them and reclamp them. Um, and at the time, I feel like every time I do a new project, I'm always putting another feather in my cap as far as like fixturing or tool paths or tooling choices. And like I think the first time we did them, we were trying to machine them in soft jaws, and we're getting a lot of deflection because we were squeezing something that was like starting as a big solid piece and then we were hollowing it out. So we were trying to program in the amount of deflection so that way we got the right shape out of the finalized part, and we made it work. But it was a very like it was a tedious process to have good parts with that type of approach. And also, there's a lot of small like slits in it and stuff like that. And when you only have an 8K spindle, it was like there's only so much time. There's only so fast you can go with a 3/16 end mill in aluminum if you have an 8K limit.
Right.
So with the Makino, I designed a lot better fixture where it actually bolted to something that kind of resembled the bracket that it mates to in the actual car. And there's no problems with chip packing because everything would fall out of the bowl instead of just being stuck in there. You have more RPM. It went from 4 ops to 2 ops. Um, we One of the big issues with the newer ones is we were getting we had some really thin wall sections of the parts to make access better for different speakers, and we were getting a lot of deformation on the walls with the end mill that I was using. So I changed the helix angle of the end mill to put less stress into the part, and that was a huge improvement to increase the quality without having to like do a ton of like low step over passes.
Okay, that's great. They're really cool parts, and I see what you mean about like commodity pricing, because like I look at that and I'm like, that's at least worth that, like if not much more with it anodizing and stuff. But I imagine at some point you can't sell speaker grills for that much more than that without people balking at the price.
Yeah, I know people already balk at the price of what it's at, but we also sell it when we have them in stock. We sell a lot of them, so it is what it is.
Right. So you mentioned your orange stuff.
Yeah.
Talk to me about changing your mindset going from a vertical mill to a horizontal mill, and like why you landed on Tombstone City tombstones and the ball locks and all of that. Like what was your thought process behind that? And are there any next steps? Are there things that you're thinking about reconfiguring?
Yeah. It definitely was scary jumping into horizontal tooling from vertical, because vertical just, double vices on a vertical bed mill. That's like a well proven recipe for success. Like it's just space efficient, workload, weight doesn't really matter on a vertical as much because the table capacities are usually really large. Horizontals, you have to be really careful with the total workload capacity, about how much weight you can put on them. So if you use, like, if I put, let's say I use that 6-sided tombstone and I put 6 orange vice doubles on there, I'd probably be at the weight limit that I could support on that tombstone without actually having any material to machine on it. So
Oh,
you have to be
what
really
is the
careful.
max you can have on that?
1,100 pounds
That's a lot, but I guess yeah, with
with a cast iron
vices,
tombstone.
yeah,
Like I think that's 500. That might be 500 pounds by itself, the tombstone. So then you're left with 600 pounds, and if you have 6 vices that are 80 pounds each, or something like that, you're right at the limit without having any material actually cutting on it.
right.
So you want to be really efficient about the weight of the fixtures that you're using. And, I really wanted to have, the machine has a pallet changer, but it's just a two station pallet changer. It's not like I have like 40 stations like, some of the five axis machines do. So you really want something that allows for like high capacities. So that way you could really load it up. Um, so those things kind of steered me towards using a 6-sided tombstone, and I really liked my 6-inch double vices. And earlier I'd visited Orange Vice and talked to Eric a lot,
Oh, cool.
um, and they were just running horizontals all the time. So I was like, I want horizontal tooling. This guy runs his business, uses horizontals to make fixtures. I should just go to him and see what he recommended for fixturing. So we ended up with all the 9-inch Delta vices, which it's definitely a mixed bag. There are definitely times that I wish I could put my orange vices, the 6-inch doubles, on the machine, that I can't because the ball lock spacing didn't line up. But for the
Oh,
most part, it's yeah. I had to make the choice when I was setting things up. It's like, do I want all the ball locks to be equidistant for the travel on the machine, or do I want two that are offset so I could reuse my vice bodies that I already have? And I
right,
was like, it was a hard choice. Eric said he would make me custom vice bodies that had the ball lock spacing that would bolt on, but it's just a question of, is it worth the money, or are
right,
there better ways to spend that money and time? So, and I chose Orange City because that's basically what Eric picked to use. He
right.
has had good results with them,
Okay,
or
and
Tombstone City. Yeah.
you're pretty happy with your setup so far?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of the 6-sided tombstone has its pluses and minuses. It really depends on the type of work you're doing. If you're just doing typical like 3-axis work, I don't think you can beat a 6-sided tombstone. if you start doing a lot of side machining, your six-sided tombstone quickly becomes a three-sided tombstone. Because if you have vices on the faces that are right next to them, you're going to have spindle interference issues.
Right.
So those all, so yeah, so in those situations, I would have been a lot better with a four-sided tombstone, but we've made it work. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I wish the soft jaws were a little cheaper so I could use them more, but I've gotten pretty adept at making fixture plates that just attach with like the orange ball lock couplers.
Oh,
So,
cool.
and most of the time, a dedicated fixture plate is going to be better than a set of soft jaws, anyways. So
Right.
it's kind of a good nudge to point me down that direction versus just like squeezing everything, and maybe not the best way because it's an easy, cheap way to go.
Right. What's your, I guess, fixture clamp of choice then when you're making those fixtures? Just a lot of mighty bites or
Yeah. I think a lot of times I'm trying to use existing holes in the actual part to bolt to a fixture plate. So I'll like have some locating geometry and I'll have threaded holes that just go into a small fixture plate that bolts to that uses the 0 point that clamps to the tombstone. And then I'll just use bolts to attach it. Or one thing that that's been really nice lately is the, I don't know if you've seen them, but or a Mighty Bite has these ID expansion clamps that they kind of push out when you thread a tapered bolt into them.
Mhm.
And those are, the concept is great. Sometimes it doesn't like, it won't necessarily work well because I don't have the amount of space. So I've just been replicating that geometry on directly into the fixtures as like a monobody type of thing. So I'll
Okay.
just build the slits and everything in the tapered section. And I bought the tapered bolts from Mighty Bite. Um, and
Oh,
I'll
that's
just
smart.
have fixtures that have integrated expanding and contracting features on them. And that's been a really, really good way to go, because there's always a lot of my parts have like a bearing bore on them or something that's, going to be very consistent because it's might be single point board in a first operation. Or if it's milled, it has multiple passes because there's going to be something that has a precision fit requirement. So using those types of features has made life really easy.
So what's your workflow with something like that? Would you have one tombstone with the vices doing that tight tolerance feature, and then you'd swap to the other tombstone holding on the ID expansion, or are you having the Mori feed that operation?
Um, everything. So I'm not using the expansion clamps on op one. Op one is always going to be, so far, is just with either using like the jaws and the master jaws for the delta vices, or I made a whole bunch of steel soft jaws for the delta vices that use like Versa grips for round
Gotcha.
stock stuff.
Hmm.
So I can, clamp anything from like 3-inch round stock to 10-inch round stock with the vices that I made, the jaws that I made. So
Oh, cool.
always op one's always that, and then op two is when I'm using those fixtures. If I have the machine full, I think the best approach is on one tombstone, I'll have op one and op two, and that way I can transfer the parts directly from the tombstone to another fixture on the tombstone. And then I'll load raw material onto the empty op one vices, and I'll have that replicated on both tombstones. And that way, it's kind of like a single piece flow type of situation where like you don't have to take something that might be wet and put it onto a tray next to the machine. You're just taking your coolant soaked part, putting it right back onto the machine, and loading it into the next station, or you know, putting your raw stock onto the first station that's now free. I
Right.
think it's having two setups, two tombstones with identical tooling setups, and having op one and op two on that same tombstone so you can change it from station to station while the other one's machining has been the best setup for me.
Yeah, I can definitely see, going back to your statement of, things are done before you even realize. I can see how efficient that would be. That sounds really nice.
Yeah, yeah, that's been huge. I think like we make wheel spacers a lot, and that's kind of one of these like commodity high quantity thing, low margin, so you have to be really fast at making them. And I think like we did a production run of 400 of them maybe in like a week, and that same like production run would have taken us a month on the Mori.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. And I'm sure they're more accurate than they've ever
Yeah,
been and nicer
yeah, the
finishes.
bore, we got like the run out to be like under 3/10,
Wow,
and the run out typically we settle for on the Mori was like a thousandths or something like that.
that's
So
killer. Are you using a lot of in-process probing on
machine
the?
does not have a probe.
No way.
Yeah, my Mori doesn't have a probe, and this one doesn't have a probe. And I have some Heimer 3D tasters, but I've never run a machine with a probe, so I've never kind of gotten spoiled by it. I Everything I program on the Makino is just programmed from the center of rotation. So I'll have a full digital model of the tombstone and all the fixtures and the parts on the fixture, and the machine is accurate enough that I don't have to have individual work coordinate system offsets for each part. I can just place the part digitally where it's going to be, and because I have like the 0 points on the tombstones and everything's doweled in place, like it all just it works, and I don't have to dick with it, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's killer. What software do you use to program?
I use a bunch of different things right now. I'm primarily using Fusion. Initially, a long time ago, I was using Mastercam, and I kind of want to potentially jump back into it. I've been watching a lot of their like product videos on YouTube, and some of the newer functionality and interface upgrades that they have kind of make me really want to um, revisit it and potentially pay the price for their very expensive license.
Indeed, it is indeed. Okay, cool. Very cool. Well, that brings us to shop news and new things. Is there anything new in your world? New workflows, new purchases, anything like that?
Yeah, I my my one employee that I've had I've had me plus one employee for probably like the last 10 years, but that single employee has changed a few times. And this one last employee just gave me his notice, and last Friday was his last day.
Oh,
So I'm currently um, trying to hire for a fabricator and a mechanical engineering internship, two separate positions, hopefully, or they could be one and the same. So I've been doing a lot of research on listing jobs and trying to kind of come to terms with what a current salary should would be, because of with all like inflation and stuff changing, like my expectation of what people would be excited for and what is actually exciting is it's hard to keep a pulse on it when things keep changing so much.
definitely.
So I've been researching that. So if anyone's looking for a job doing machining work, send me a DM on Instagram or an email. um, I'd be interested to talk to you. And we just got an ultrasonic cleaner for the first time. So I've been kind of researching different types of like soaps and solvents that you can use to clean with them. I don't really have any experience with that. So I'm really excited to see if those things will be as good as I hope they would be. And we're building, I think a lot of shops have already done this. I know like John Grimsmo and John Saunders have done it, but I recently obtained like an IBC tote that I'm hooking up to my RO water system. And I want to have like pump to like pipe pressurized water around the shop to help fill machines versus just having like a 55-gallon drum of just water that we scoop out of to mix coolant from. Looking for something a little bit more automated so we can mix at the machines and just auto dispense in, because I think that's a good way to save time and to reduce problems.
Definitely. What kind of safeties are you putting in it? Because I saw you, I don't know if it was a post or a story, but you have it up on a rack too. So like
Yeah.
if it does overflow, it's going to be not great.
Yeah, I haven't figured anything out yet, but I definitely want to put maybe a couple redundant type of like check valves on it, as far as like, I guess there's going to have to be like a level sensor type of float that will operate when the RO system can feed into it and when it can't. So we'll just have to see. Fortunately, everything that's underneath the area where it is probably could get wet, and it wouldn't be the end of the world. There's no computers or electronics in that area. It's all like hand tools, and like below that is a little room that I created. I call the dirty room, which is like where there's like a belt sander and we do powder coating and sandblasting and stuff in there. So like if mayhem happened and it got wet in there, it wouldn't be the end of the world.
Okay, good.
Um, but yeah, I definitely want to have some type of float sensor and maybe a redundant float sensor behind that as well. Um, so I have to figure out what type of pumps to buy, because I tried to build a system kind of like this where I just use the pressure from the RO water system to go through a metering pump to dispense coolant. But I found out really quickly that those dispensing units need a constant pressure input. And with the RO water systems, like you start at like 20 psi and it like quickly drops down to like 10 psi, then 5 psi and no psi. So like the percentage you'd get out would vary quite drastically when as the water pressure fluctuated. So I need to figure out like a pump that can just hold. I need to figure out a way to hold a constant pressure and to get RO water to all the machines at the shop, so that way I can use one of those metering valves reliably.
Right. Well, I know if you use instead of a metering valve, like the dosatrons or
Yeah, I've
whatever,
heard about the dosatrons.
so those don't need a constant pressure. They don't
Okay.
vary concentration based on pressure, is what I've heard.
Okay.
Because I have a metering valve as well, and like we hook up a hose to it, and I've got a little 5 gallon bucket with a head on it that basically does that. And yeah,
Yep.
I I'll shoot some out, check the concentration, be like, oh, that's what our water pressure is at today. Cool, okay, time to adjust. So I've been looking into a dosatron. What sucks is like I can buy a metering valve all day online and not talk to somebody, and like I cannot find a mixatron or a dosatron just like the price out in the open anywhere. It's like I don't want to contact somebody. Like this is just like one of those 12 a.m. purchases that I'm just gonna do one of these days, but
Yep.
I can't yet. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
frustrating.
I have heard of those and they've been on my radar. I know they're like a lot more expensive than your standard metering valves, but I
I
think
think they're
they
like
also
10x or something. I think it's
yeah.
like $1,200 instead of $120
Right.
or around
So
that.
I'll have to see. I don't know. Sometimes some stuff I'm a cheapskate about, and some stuff I'm willing to throw money at it. And I feel like I might try to go the cheap route first if I can with a metering valve and just a simple pump that might be able to hold a set pressure, or maybe I can put like a regulator in front of the pump so that way it only sends a certain amount of psi through the lines or something.
Oh, that's smart.
But
Yeah,
that's that's going to be my approach, and I have to just research and figure out all the right kind of check valves and stuff like that.
yeah. That sounds
So
like a fun project though, and definitely helpful.
yeah, it's gonna be nice. It's like just being able to like fill up your machine with the coolant percentage that you want without a lot of extra legwork is good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that brings me to the last question I ask every guest every week, which is what did you research this week? And it can be anything under the sun, just what's been popping up in your browser.
I think the things we kind of just talked about is what I've been researching.
Okay.
Yeah, just like ways to build a, a robust RO water system that can convert to dispensing coolant accurately, and what type of chemicals I should be using in an ultrasonic cleaner to get the results that I want. Those are
Okay.
like the two big things. Because I don't a lot of car parts that I get are like covered with like asphalt based undercoating and stuff. And like we just have like a horrible freight parts washer that has like mineral spirits in it or something like that. And we just sit there and scrub it, which is not a very good use of anyone's time. So I've been
Right.
trying to figure out if there's a way to do that kind of work in the ultrasonic to kind of streamline things.
I will say I don't know a ton about ultrasonics, but what I do know is that the pH is super important if you're cleaning aluminum. Like you can
Okay.
burn aluminum parts very, very easily with the wrong cleaner.
Okay.
And so you may want to look at just buying another cheap ultrasonic for like dirty car parts
Yeah.
versus contaminating your, like if you're just cleaning parts off the machine. Yeah, I've heard of quite a few people burning parts pretty badly in a ultrasonic. You leave it for a little longer than you expected and you come back and they look like, post anodized dunk parts kind of thing. I know we just got an ultrasonic cleaner, like the old one from Brad's day job, and we bought Simple Green makes an aircraft cleaner that's
Yep.
supposed to be fairly aluminum safe.
Hmm.
We've used it a little bit so far, and it seems okay. We haven't left parts in there. I haven't intentionally tried to burn anything yet, just to see if it'll do it. But I've heard pretty good things about it, so
Yeah.
that's my very uneducated 2 cents on the issue.
Have you heard about the foil test?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so I bought as with many things, I look for a used option, and I was like, oh, I should just buy what was a very expensive new ultrasonic cleaner for cheap when it's being used. So I found a Quantrex, an L&R Quantrex 310 ultrasonic cleaner, which is like a fairly large desktop kind of ultrasonic cleaner. And those are like, if you go on like MSC, they're like $3,500 or something for like one of those new.
Oh,
So I was like,
geez.
if it's that expensive, it's got to be great. And I got this use ultrasonic cleaner, and I've never used one before, so I don't really know what to expect or how to test it. And I looked up the LNR documentation, and they basically have this thing called a foil test, where if you put like a sheet of regular aluminum foil, not heavy duty, into your cabinet or into the cleaner and run it for 1 minute, you should see like a certain number of perforations and peening on the aluminum foil. Um,
to,
and
to
that's how you
measure
can
how good the ultrasonic horn is.
yeah, just to
Oh,
like validate that your machine is working accurately, or it has enough strength still. Um,
interesting.
and that was really cool because I was like, how am I going to test this thing to know if I should like keep it or return it? Because it's just a used ultrasonic, right?
Right.
Like, I'm sure that there are mechanical things that vibrate. They have to break at some point.
So did it pass?
It did. Initially, it failed, and that was partially due to my misunderstanding of how ultrasonics work. I didn't realize it, but there's this very important process called degassing that you're supposed to do, which basically, if you fill your ultrasonic with water, you're supposed to take all the gas out of the water, like all the oxygen and nitrogen, because those little bubbles, they actually act as like a buffer. Um, and all the energy will be spent compressing and expanding these bubbles of gas in the water. So, what they recommend is just to run the ultrasonic empty for like 10 minutes before you use it, and that will like shake all the air bubble molecules out of the water and it degasses it.
Oh,
So
interesting.
the first time I didn't really understand what the degassing was, and I was like, that sounds like some hogwash. Let's just go for it. And like there was no perforations in the sheet, and I was like, maybe this thing is bad. And I started doing some more research, and I was like, oh, this degassing thing actually sounds like it's pretty critical. Maybe I should actually try it. And I tried it again, and then like the foil that I had like 10 little pinholes in it, and I was like, oh, okay, we're good.
That's great. That's really cool. Yeah, it's you don't really realize until you're like a little bit down the road that you're like, man, cleaning parts just takes forever. Like,
Yes.
especially when you start doing scale, you're like, this just sucks. Like, I need something that's if it's not automated, at least I can batch stuff because like cleaning with parts one at a time in a sink or something, you're like, this is terrible.
Yeah, it's not a wise way to go in today's modern world.
Right.
There's got to be a way to automate this or use some type of tool to streamline it.
Yeah. Very cool. I look forward to seeing how both that system and your RO system come out. I hope you post about it because every time somebody adds some knowledge to the group
Yeah.
think about this whole thing, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, I know John Grimsmo, he used to be a competitor of mine when he made Volvo parts back in the day before he started making knives. I was DMing him about his water system because I think he came up with a little like electronic box that you can click a button and it would automatically fill for like 5 minutes or 30 seconds. And I was trying to get him to sell me that box so that way I could just get a head start with all the dispensing and stuff. So we'll see if he's willing to or not. Maybe other people could ask him to and see if he's going to sell his water dispensing box so we don't have to recreate the wheel.
Yeah, there you go. Well, you heard it here. If you're interested, go bug John Grimsmo about it.
You're welcome, John.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. It's been really nice to put a face to the name and really get to hear your story and all the good things BNE.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks to all the Patreon members, you included. Lets me send people like you headsets so that we have decent audio. I've also, for anybody who's not on the Patreon, I just started a kind of supplemental Patreon only podcast. It's about 15 minutes every other week, just kind of talking shop updates. So yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Thanks everyone for backing, and I'll be back next week.